After 3 years apart, my wife came back and said she wanted our life again. I gave her a month of my time before I understood what she actually wanted. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story didn't start with a knock on my door 3 years after she left. It started 12 years before that, on a Tuesday evening when a mutual friend introduced me to a woman named Laura at a small gathering, and I spent the rest of that night talking to her about everything and nothing, and drove home thinking I had just met someone I wanted to know for the rest of my life. And for a long time, that's exactly what happened. My name is David, and Laura and I were married for 12 years. We built a life together in Nashville the way people build lives, slowly, with small decisions that accumulate into something real. A house, a routine, a language between two people that nobody else fully speaks. She was a teacher. I worked in project management. We weren't dramatic people. We weren't the kind of couple that fought loudly or loved loudly. We were just solid, the way a good foundation is solid, not exciting, but reliable and real. I knew about Jake before she left. Not everything, but enough. He was someone from her past, a musician she had dated briefly in high school before her parents had put a stop to it. They thought he was irresponsible, going nowhere, the kind of boy who was charming enough to be dangerous and not serious enough to be trusted. Laura had ended it because she was 17 and she did what her parents told her, and I think some part of her had carried that unfinished thing quietly inside her for a very long time without either of us fully knowing it was there. They reconnected online. That's how it always seems to happen now. A message, a memory, a conversation that starts innocently and goes somewhere else. She told me about it at first, casually, the way you mentioned running into someone from school. And then she mentioned him less, and I noticed that. And then one evening she sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me she needed time to figure something out. I asked her what she needed to figure out. She said she wasn't sure she had ever really made her own choices. I let her go, not because I didn't love her, but because I was 41 years old and I had enough self-respect to know that holding on to someone who was already halfway out the door was not love. It was just fear wearing love's clothing. She moved out in March. She moved toward Jake and the life she had imagined and the unfinished story she had been carrying since she was 17 years old. For the first year, I was angry. The way you're angry when something that was supposed to be permanent turns out to be conditional. For the second year, I was sad. The slow, quiet kind of sad that doesn't announce itself, but just sits in the house with you. By the third year, I had started to build something that felt like my own life again. Smaller than before, but genuinely mine, with room in it for things I had forgotten I cared about. And then one evening in October, she knocked on my door. She was standing on my porch with her coat buttoned up against the cold, and she looked different in a way I couldn't immediately name. Thinner, maybe, or tired, or like someone who had been making an effort to appear okay for long enough that the effort itself was starting to show. She asked if she could come in. I said yes, because I am not someone who turns people away at the door, even people who have hurt me, and because some part of me that I hadn't fully dismantled yet still responded to her presence like she belonged in my space. We sat in the kitchen. I made tea, and she told me she had made a mistake. She said Jake was not the person she had built him into in her memory. She said the reality of a life with him was very different from the idea of a life with him. She said she had been chasing something that didn't exist, and that she had destroyed something real in the process, and that she was sorry, and that she wanted to come home. I listened to all of it. I watched her face while she talked, and something in me that had been waiting for exactly this moment for 3 years quietly and carefully said, "Wait, don't move too fast. Look at this clearly before you decide anything." I told her I needed time to think. She said she understood. She went back to the apartment she had been renting, and I sat alone in my kitchen with my tea going cold and tried to figure out what I actually wanted. Over the following 2 weeks, I let her back into my life incrementally. Dinners, conversations, an afternoon at the house. She was warm and present and seemed genuinely remorseful in a way that was hard to question. I found myself softening in the way that years of shared history make you soften, because 12 years of knowing someone leaves traces that don't disappear just because the relationship ended. But something was slightly off. I couldn't name it exactly. Just a texture of something held back, some room in her that I wasn't being invited into, a phone that was always nearby and always face down. Small things. The kind of things that your gut registers before your brain catches up. One evening, she left her phone on the kitchen counter when she went to take a shower. I am not someone who goes through other people's phones. I want to be clear about that. But the screen lit up with a message, and I saw the name before I could look away. Jake. I didn't read the message. I put the phone back exactly where it was, and I sat down, and I waited for her to come back. And I spent the rest of that evening being completely normal, because I needed time to decide what to do with what I now knew. I didn't confront her that night. I needed to know more before I said anything. Not because I was looking for ammunition, but because I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. There is a difference between a woman who made a mistake and reached out to an ex once, and a woman who had come back to my life with a plan that had nothing to do with me. I needed to know which one I was sitting across from at dinner. Over the next few days, I paid attention in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. The phone always faced down. The slight delay before she answered simple questions about her day. The way she excused herself to take calls in the other room with the door pulled nearly shut. And then one afternoon when she was at work, I found a printed email she had left in the side pocket of her bag, which was sitting open on the kitchen chair. I wasn't looking for it. It was there, and I saw it, and I read it. It was from Jake. It was 3 weeks old, written around the time she had first come back to my door. And it was not the message of a man she had left. It was the message of a man she was still in conversation with, still making plans with, still reassuring. He wrote that he understood what she was doing and why, that he wasn't happy about it, but that he got it, and that he would be there when things settled down. He called her by a nickname I had never heard anyone use for her. He ended it by saying he loved her and that some things don't change no matter how much time passes. I folded the email and put it back exactly where I found it. That evening I made dinner. We ate together. We talked about ordinary things. And after she had cleared the plates and we were sitting with our wine, I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." She looked at me and something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly, more like a door closing very quickly behind a light that had briefly shone through. I said, "Are you still in contact with Jake?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We've talked a few times. It's not what you think." I said, "Tell me what it is then." And she did something I hadn't expected. She told me the truth. Not all of it. Not immediately. But she started talking, and once she started, she didn't stop. The way people talk when they have been carrying something heavy alone for too long, and the relief of setting it down outweighs the fear of what happens next. She was pregnant. 8 weeks. The baby was Jake's. He had found out 2 months before she came back to my door, and he had told her clearly and without cruelty that he didn't want children, that it wasn't the life he had chosen, and that he would support whatever decision she made, but that he wouldn't be a father. She had spent those 2 months trying to change his mind, and then accepting that she couldn't, and then she had come back to me. She said she loved me. She said that was true. But she also said that she had come back because she needed stability, because she needed someone who would be a real father, because she couldn't raise a child alone and Jake wasn't going to be there. And she said she had told herself that maybe over time the rest would follow, that maybe coming back was the right thing for reasons she hadn't fully sorted out yet. I listened to all of it without interrupting. And then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. I said, "And Jake? What happens with Jake once the baby comes?" She looked at the table. She said she didn't know. But I knew. Because I had read that email and I had heard his voice in those words, and I understood exactly what the plan was. Even if she hadn't said it out loud, and maybe hadn't even fully admitted it to herself. She would have the baby. She would have the stability. And she would keep the door to Jake open, because some part of her still believed that one day he would walk through it as a different man, a man who wanted what she wanted, a man who had finally grown into the person she had always believed he could be. I sat with all of that for a long moment. And then I said what I needed to say. I told her that I couldn't do this. Not because of the pregnancy, not because of Jake, but because of what she had described, which was a life built on a foundation of waiting for something else. I told her that a child deserved more than a father who was a placeholder and a mother who was half somewhere else. I told her that the most important thing in that baby's life was going to be her. Not me, not Jake, but her, and that the child needed her to be fully present, not divided between a life she had chosen and a life she was still chasing. I told her that Jake might change one day, or he might not, and that was between her and whatever she decided to do with that, but that I was not going to be the safe option that she returned to between chapters of a different story. She started to cry. Real tears, and I don't say that to diminish them because they were real. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't meant for it to be this way. I told her I believed her, because I did. I don't think she had sat down and planned any of this with cold calculation. I think she was a person who had never stopped loving someone she was told she couldn't have, and who had made one complicated decision after another trying to hold on to that love while also building something that looked like a real life. But understanding something doesn't mean you have to absorb the consequences of it. I helped her carry her things to her car that night. We didn't talk much. At the door, she turned and looked at me and said, "I'm sorry I couldn't be what you deserved." I said, "Take care of yourself, Laura, and take care of that baby." She drove away, and I went back inside and stood in my kitchen for a while, and then I washed the dishes from dinner and went to bed. 5 years passed. I built a life that was genuinely mine this time. New city, new work, mornings that belonged only to me, and evenings I chose freely. I didn't hear from Laura during those years, and I didn't reach out. And then one morning a letter arrived. Paper, handwritten, the kind of thing nobody sends anymore. It was from Laura. She wrote that she had left Jake 6 months after our last conversation, that she had raised her son alone, that it had been the hardest and most clarifying thing she had ever done. She wrote that she finally understood what real love felt like because she felt it every day when she looked at her boy, and that it was nothing like what she had been chasing. She thanked me for what I had said to her that night in the kitchen, for not being cruel about it, for telling her the truth when she wasn't ready to tell it to herself. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't suggest meeting. It was just a letter, clean and complete, from someone who had found her way to solid ground and wanted me to know. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of my desk where I keep the things that matter. Then I made coffee and started my day.